okay,
Okay.
appreciate it. It's up to them, they can do what they like.
Yeah.
And I said, I think we know what your issues are. I think you summarized them really well, you guys wrote a bunch of text. 100% don't want to have this section in there that everybody can. That's exactly. It. I said, I think everyone gets it. It's not even in New Jersey.
Right.
Speaking of trees, we had several trees taken down in front of our HOA pool. Took them all down, beautiful trees, problem. Where they planted them, where the city planted them. It screwed up the entire irrigation system, ruined it, and replaced the entire irrigation system. Took down all the trees, they're planting new ones, but without the roots where it's gonna screw up anything.
It's a different species tree.
I guess.
You know?
I used to be on that committee too, but I dropped it. Finally, I dropped one. Yeah,
Colin will do the tree things here.
Okay.
John? That's very good.
oh,
Seen that area?
You get
I-
half of
Two and
it.
a half hours in the dentist chair today.
All right, keep going, cut you off.
Do you want?
Now, I had a measure for.
You'll see me playing on my phone.
That's no.
Oh, I didn't know you could swing it
And
around.
along-
Keep swinging in, keep
The
swinging.
jaw so sore. When having.
We're gonna cut off Jefferson on the end.
Yeah.
Yep. I've had my share. Oh. Crowns and implants.
Oh, I haven't had any implants.
Yeah.
I've had some crowns before. The difference between a gold crown, which this is gonna be, and a silver.
Hi.
Made out
Welcome.
of 20 bucks. Crap, to put in the gold. And said, well, it'll last a long time. I thought it'll outlast me. I
Right.
knew that for a fact.
Yeah, I grind my teeth, so I've shattered. all my-
I'm sorry.
I grind my teeth. I've
Oh.
shattered all my.
Oh, I
top and
know.
bottom.
I'm always. Two things, you're grinding your teeth and you floss very much. What's that?
Oh, yes, all the time, but I have bad bruxism and I just literally have shattered.
Huh?
We were talking about dental work.
I was there this week.
Good.
Okay, you.
Hey Deb, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Sure can, thank you.
Some days he's gonna take off that.
I think she likes it.
You don't like her yet? I think it's, Sarah Friend, you first walked.
Oh, there, man, I missed the guys. So you used to just have.
Otherwise, you're still on probation. That'll work.
You're usually. It's freezing in here.
Thank you.
You hear?
It is cold in here and I'm not usually cold.
All I can do is make note of it, I don't have.
I know.
Well, I had 0 control.
Can you do it?
No.
know if that actually does anything.
It does not.
Oh,
Oh,
So it's on a system, it's like up and down, and it might not be set for the new fall.
always right, 'cause you
Yeah.
always have a Christmas tree.
Probably. It's usually hot, not usually hot in here.
We haven't had one up in a couple of years, let alone that we got one. You were gone then, but we do put it up, it's up about 3 weeks.
Are you real Christmas tree guy, or are you a real Christmas tree guy, or you know?
We're gone too much.
Yeah.
We used to have two trees,
Well,
one for the kids and one for us.
Oh.
The kids are grandkids that are older.
I believe we can.
Yeah, we switched over to a fake tree guy, it's just so much easier now.
No, she said not to hold on.
Yeah.
You know, we've been. Said not to anymore.
All of a sudden, I can't hear anything from the room.
We
Just
can hear
quiet.
you, but we're not saying anything.
I can move, but I don't think it didn't block. It's not blocking, is it?
Her being up here?
Yeah, that we're blocking her camera.
Oh, you can kind of see right here. This is us, but it's not blocking anything.
Fortunately, I kept all my stuff from before the council meeting, so.
Huh?
I kept all my stuff.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Went a little while there, huh? With that one. We went a little while there with that one.
Yeah, well, I knew that they would have it back eventually. So
Yeah.
that's unusual to have two meetings council new to lack of reform in a row.
Yeah, that last one, I had my tonsils taken out a couple of days. I had my tonsils removed a couple of days and that was a painful.
Or that.
That was not fun.
Yeah, I had mine taken. I think when I was 6 or 7 or something.
Well, they say as a kid, as a younger person, it's my daughter did too this year, and there's the doctor, yeah, for older people, it is not a fun surgery to recover
Oh,
from.
are you able to keep the fish?
And mine was humongous. She's like, you got a
Oh,
lot.
you
Throw that there.
Fish that you got? Oh, cool.
So,
I spent 2.5
You guys
hours in the dentist.
spoke them? Oh, that's
really,
awesome.
they did it at the dentist.
Yeah, my wife loves smoke.
Oh, today, oh, sorry, oh.
Yeah, she was like eating smoke.
I had imprints.
It doesn't need anything.
I fished,
Yeah.
rocks. I was on Shipneck Island, which is a glacier in Alaska.
And they had.
And the natives would come down and trade
And
us,
send it in.
smoke
It's
signals
very temporary now.
for things that they want.
Oh,
So
cool.
they stick that stuff in there, they stick that mold in there, is that what they do?
They do it going real good up there?
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Wow.
I went to, my dentist has this new technology, which usually that's what they've done. He has some little machine that he's just kind of running through your teeth. And this is making a 3D image. It's amazing. So you can instantly, and, yeah, he just used a little, it was just like a little pen. It just kind of took everything, going around it, did like 10 times.
Yeah.
That was it. Sent it out, came back, and those things fit perfect. I'm like,
Well, I haven't seen you since our last. meeting. How was that one?
oh, that was great. That was fun.
I really,
Oh, wow.
I didn't take, I never really knew much about Colorado.
Like.
But soon as I saw that coach, and I didn't like him. He was such an arrogant, flamboyant guy.
Yeah.
They
I didn't realize until I read up, I don't follow
Yeah.
national football.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is this a job you had a while ago?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I still like he's a.
Oh, yeah.
They did egg roll. and
Yeah,
other
there was a
things.
lot of interest in that game, that's for
Wow.
sure.
Hi, Mackenzie.
6:15, we're getting close.
Someone said.
Mackenzie, we can see you. Can you hear us?
Smiling, but not saying anything.
Okay. Well, according to the clock in the room, it is 7 o'clock. Are you ready to start? Okay. So I will now open the planning commission meeting of September 28th, 2003. I'm the chair, and can we have a roll call, please?
Yeah, you and me.
I'm happy to. Commissioner Lassen,
Present.
Commissioner Bravo,
Here,
Commissioner Berlin,
Here.
Commissioner Bartel,
Here,
Chair Ellsworth,
Here.
and I have excused absences for both Vice Chair Hernandez Mejia and Commissioner Corning. Spoke with both.
Thank you. Will you join me in the flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Did everyone have a chance to look through the minutes? Are there any additions or corrections? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve both the minutes from July 27th of 2003 and of August 10th, 2023.
So moved.
Second. We have a move and a second. All in favor, say aye.
All right.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, do we have any business from the public? I don't see anyone in the room. Is there anyone on camera? Nope, I don't see any. Any communications from staff?
None?
Okay. In that case, we have public hearings before us. I would like to open the hearing for MOC 23-02 for Fleet Sales West Shop Building located at 2175 North Pacific Highway. This looks to be a modification of conditions request regarding the requirement to bury above ground power lines or pay fee in lieu. The associated approval is DR 22-24 and variance 22-13. Do we have a first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for declarations from the commission. Are there any conflicts of interest or any ex parte conversations? Hearing none. Are there any challenges to the declarations by the audience or anyone else? Hearing none, I will ask you to read the hearing statement.
Thank you. Both Oregon Law and Woodburn and the Woodburn Development Ordinance govern evidentiary quasi-judicial land use hearings and require that at the commencement of the hearing, this statement be read to all persons in attendance. The applicable substantive criteria for this land use decision are listed in the staff report and are as follows. WDO, the Woodburn Development Ordinance 3.02.04, as well as 4.02.07. The hearing will proceed in the following order: a staff report, applicant's presentation, testimony in favor of the application, then testimony in opposition to the application, an opportunity for rebuttal, a closure of the record, then deliberation and decision by the commission. All testimony, arguments, and evidence must be directed towards the applicable substantive criteria just stated or other criteria in a plan or land use regulation which the person believes applies to this decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes an appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Additionally, a failure of the applicant to raise a constitutional or other issue relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. And finally, any party wanting a continuance or to keep the record open must make that request while the record is open.
Thank you. Do we have a staff report?
We do. Thank you, Chair Ellsworth. My name is Dan Handel, planner, and I will be presenting this to you this evening. So we are looking at 2175 North Pacific Highway. You may recognize this address, the Fleet Sales West name. It was before you back in April. Juan, this will be new to you, Commissioner Bravo, excuse me. But they were here back in April for a design review approval. So that was just a few months ago. There we go. So some procedural context. I talked about the design review already. The applicant was conditioned through that design review to meet one of our development ordinance requirements. So they are before you tonight again with a request to modify that approval, modify that condition, and remove that requirement from their project. So because that was the design review was originally a type 3 review and approval by the commission, any modifications to it and to those conditions need to come back before you. So staff can't just change a condition on you or apply a different standard. So with that, I'll go ahead and enter the staff report and its attachments into the record. And some brief location context now. We're in the northeast corner of town. So just north of Safeway, north of the outlet or the strip mall that has the DMV office in it, along North Pacific Highway. This is the location here outlined in yellow. It's Fleet Sales West. And This business, they manufacture fleet vehicles for other commercial businesses. So every truck they manufacture is kind of custom made to fit that particular order, and then it's shipped out to the customer. The approval back in April was for a 7,200 square foot shop building expansion. I outlined the location generally in red here. That was to increase the manufacturing capacity of the site. And the condition or the requirement, I should say, that the applicant is here to request to remove is associated with the above ground power lines along the site frontage. This picture here was from Google Maps earlier this summer. You can see the overhead power lines along the highway. Basically, our development ordinance requires burial of these power lines if certain criteria are met. So first, a property has to have at least 250 feet of frontage that has power lines. This particular property is right at that number. They have exactly 250 feet. So that requirement kicks in, and from there they have either the option to bury the power lines or pay a fee in lieu. And that fee in lieu option comes in if by removing these poles and putting those lines underground on either end of the property, they would actually be putting in more poles. The city allows a fee in lieu instead of going through that process. The kind of intent and purpose of that being the goal here is to reduce the number of poles, reduce those safety, visibility obstructions. Obviously, there's an aesthetic component to that. You know, you don't want more poles going up and cluttering the space. So we have that fee in lieu option, and the applicant requested to do that fee in lieu. So appropriately, the city conditioned a fee in lieu on that, and the commission approved that project with the fee in lieu on there. So tonight they are back before you requesting to remove this condition. Again, this was a code requirement. The request is essentially a variance request to no longer meet this requirement, to no longer bury those lines or pay the fee in lieu. And staff's recommendation here is we believe the project is still substantial enough to warrant the requirement remaining. It's about a 26% increase in building area on the property. So it's a fairly substantial expansion to the site. So we're not necessarily comfortable recommending completely removing it, but we are recommending a modified dollar amount. And this kind of is a story about timing here. So just a couple months ago, the Chick-fil-A project was before you. Part of that review, the applicant submitted some analysis that they had done for the Willamette Valley area on undergrounding requirements, fees in lieu that other cities charge. And so part of that review, it was brought to our attention that our prior fee that we had been charging to applicants was maybe a little, it needed some improvement. So we responded accordingly. We came up with a new fee calculation for how we create this fee in lieu. And it's a little more appropriate to the Woodburn area. So we are coming back here with a recommendation tonight that this fee be upgraded or updated to match that new precedent that's been set by Chick-fil-A. So that new value or that new calculation is what we'll be recommending for all future applications that you see. for undergrounding fees. And in this case, the applicant's requesting to modify this condition, so we're recommending to follow our new precedent. So really tonight, it's a relatively straightforward decision for you to make. One, you can approve the applicant's request, which is to completely remove that burial requirement. And that would be by striking condition number 6 of the approval. You can choose to deny the variance request. That variance request being to remove the power line burial. You can deny that, but you can also approve the modification I just mentioned to that condition. So that would bring it down to the 67,715 number. It's about half of what the original condition states. Or the third option, you can deny the variance request and keep the condition unchanged. So maintaining that prior dollar amount. That's what I got.
Before I invite the applicant up, do you have any questions for staff?
Well, I mean, yeah, I want to say something. I'm very unhappy that when they did the interchange, they didn't bury the stuff. I mean, it has to do with aesthetics too. If you don't care about the way a place looks, then it just keeps going down, down, down. And
But that's our deliberation. Do you have a question for staff?
well, all right, no question. I'll deliberate after.
But I do have a question for staff. When it comes to the fees, the fee and when we collect those fees,
Yeah.
what happens to the money?
So right now we have just a pot of money that we collect and goes exactly to as undergrounding projects come up. More specifically, as we have the financial means to pursue them and complete them, that this money would go towards that. It may not be exactly this location, but that pot of money would support
Is used
and
to support
finance the undergrounding
when it
efforts.
makes fiscal sense.
Is the amount, the 100 and whatever, the cost of actually undergrounding it, or is that just an arbitrary amount?
It's a little hard to answer that question because the estimate that we received from PGE, our PGE rep, was specifically for the undergrounding work along this site frontage. So this 250 feet of distance here, the estimate we got was just for that. So that involves adding more poles at either end and then running the lines underground just there. As you include more land, more frontage, it becomes cheaper per foot, per mile to underground those lines because you're involving fewer poles, you remove more poles, and it just kind of economies of scale. In this instance, the fee is not lined up specifically with what the PGE estimate is, but it's a little more consistent with kind of a broader scale, what the cost would be.
Any other questions? Commissioner Bartel, do you have any questions?
Not yet, but I think I probably will when we get closer to deliberation.
Okay, at this time, I would like to invite the applicant up to speak. Please come to the front and state your name and address. And I think Chris is going to help you make sure that it's on.
Oh, thanks.
Welcome. Please give us your name and address.
Merle Wood, 6813 Arborwood Court Northeast, Kaiser, Oregon, 97303. Thank you. So, truly I'm here because we can't afford the fee. I just got a statement from my plumber
that said, all my plumbing fixtures have a 48-hour price range on them. And this whole project has gone this way. I talked to my electrician and he's looking at, Merle, you may have to pay money to have transformers put in. So I bought a building for $125,000. The square footage of the building is going to house 2 bays of repair work. It's not going to add any employees. We have roughly 16, 17 employees. We put out big product, but we're actually a really small company. Our area is huge, but our product is big. So it's not as lucrative as it appears. And then, we're looking at challenges now with the EPA, with trucks. We're looking at next year, we may not get any trucks. So to put out $400,000 or $500,000 for a $125,000 building, we're really teetering on right now if we really can even afford to keep going forward with it. Steve, my planner, did a well job of, we're more than happy to put in the sidewalk improvements, $30,000-$40,000 worth of landscaping. We have to build an easement from our property to the property line of the strip mall to the south. Bike, EV, additional parking, the sidewalk improvement on Industrial Way. And Steve and I were talking, my city planner, and he said, Merle, you're really at about 30% above the cost of my building that I'm going to put in. And right now I'm at about $480,000-$90,000 to put this building in. And this is not knowing what's going to happen with PGE and the transformers and things like that. So basically, I'm just asking that it be removed to make it affordable for us to continue with this project, because it's really getting to the point where another 60, 70,000. We really appreciate that it went from 147 to 67,000. Chick-fil-A and Fleet Sales West are 2 different entities that I don't think is a fair comparison. It's also Chick-fil-A was on a new install. Everything was new. They didn't have to modify or meet any other conditions other than the normal building standards that you ask. And here, we have perfectly good sidewalks out in front of our frontage, and it's looked well for a long period of time. And absolutely, we'd love to, if it makes City of Woodburn look better, it makes us look better too. I mean, that's just common sense. I took the liberty of last week driving down 99E, and so in order to remove a telephone pole and put it underground, you would have to have at least 3 poles on your property line. And there's no frontage on 99E from our building to the end of town that has a property line that has 3 poles. So I was thinking, when will these lines will ever get buried? Because, if there's not 3, then anybody that does any improvements will never be able to bury the power lines. And I was driving out of town, and the only part of town that could really benefit from the poles being taken out is the new, and I just noticed this, the new storage shed building out at the end of town. So their frontage is quite long, probably 1/8 of a mile long. And I was curious if, that would have been an opportunity to bury some power lines. That you probably get rid of 6, 8, 10 poles on their property. And it appears that their poles are still in place. And, had the city buried it, if you're on the other side of the street from the power poles, are you still entitled to this same burial fee? Like Taco Bell or Safeway? Because the poles only are on the west side of 99. They're not on the east side. We were put in a big property improvement across the street from us. And, they're pulling power above ground over to their property. And, anybody on the east side of 99 doesn't have power lines. So are they expected to pay a burial fee if they don't have power lines on their side of the street? So, I mean, just a lot of the things that you know, it just doesn't, if it made more sense, I came down here and asked that, could I put the money in a trust fund? I mean, I'm more than happy to, you know, trust it into an account that belongs to the city, and I'll draw interest off it until you guys want it for the power line burial. And I didn't mean that. I guess it's ignorance on my part, but that's kind of how I felt about it. And, you know, now just with everything that's been happening, you know, every one of so I started getting bids in, October of 22, and almost everything has tripled in price. My foundation went from 58 to 108. My insulation, I had to do a $30,000 improvement on my insulation and a safety barrier. I mean, I'm just getting hit with one thing after another. And this is the only place that I can really ask for leniency and hopefully be able to continue building my building. That's really all I have to present. And, you know, I do appreciate, and I was just talking to my owner before the meeting. I don't know if the $67,000, even if we got it cut in half or to that number, which is greatly appreciated, that it's really even feasible for us to move forward with that. So that's my only argument that I really have. So I thank you for your time. Want me to go sit down?
Well, I can appreciate the fact that everything's doubled and tripled and everything. But when we go to underground, it's going to be the same situation.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I was told it was like $440,000 to put the stuff underground just on our property if we were to do that. I believe that's what PGE originally said.
Wow.
I mean, that would have took us right out of the water right there. You know, and then the sidewalk improvements, you know, $70,000-$80,000 on each frontage. And, you know, it's yeah, it's just we just really can't absorb the burial fee. So you know, I know that some companies and other, I went back through and read some other final decisions, and that's been granted to other entities, and I'm hoping that will be considered.
So does anyone have questions for the applicant at this time?
Yeah, how long have you guys been there?
Since 2010.
Do we have anyone that wishes to speak in support of this request? I see no one in the audience, and I really don't see anyone online. Do we have anyone that wishes to speak in opposition? Still see no one in the audience or online. So since we had no opposition, we don't need a rebuttal. And I believe I can close the hearing now. And now we can deliberate.
I appreciate everything you said, but you know, what happens to all of this stuff?
I'm afraid that this sets a precedence that we can't come back is my only concern.
Can I make a small request? Could you stay closer to the mics
Oh, sure.
for us when you're talking? Everyone up, as well as myself. That's for the folks that are listening. Yep. On the other end. Thank you.
Now, one question I had, when they pay the fee in lieu, does that put a plan in motion to get anything going as far as that? I mean, or is that what happens? I guess we've talked about this a little bit, but the burial, does that ever come in? When does that come into play?
So in our comprehensive plan, the city's comprehensive plan does have a goal and a few policies to getting towards undergrounding, exploring routes for how to finance that undergrounding effort along North Pacific Highway. As far as I'm aware, there's no current capital improvement plan or project identified for this. So for the meantime, it would sit in the city's budget or the city's accounts. And as other projects are coming through the process, reviewed and conditioned similarly, they would add to it.
And I'm sorry. I was just going to add to Dan's comment.
typically we wait until, I mean, it needs to be a big enough number to make it a worthwhile project, right? The city doesn't typically do one-off,
Right.
but you know, when you do the whole downtown, you're doing First Street. There was a very deliberate decision by the council at the time to not bury the lines at the time, and it had to do with the costs that were involved. They're significant costs. You know, we just did Hayes Street. I haven't looked, but I'm willing to bet lunch that we didn't bury the lines out there. So the idea is this builds up that pot of money to do those public improvements when we get in there. So it usually takes a little time. It's not that we collect one and we do it in front of one lot. We usually do bigger projects that are larger. So usually that pot of money builds up.
Now, if he's over on Industrial Way or one of these other areas, is this similar to that area, or is this just because it's on a frontage area like
Yeah,
99?
can you
if it's a
put up
place?
drawings for us so that we
Yeah.
can look at them while we talk?
This is 99.
Yeah, so so if he was over on Industrial or any of these buildings back there, Progress, would this similar situation apply to those buildings that, you know, if they're in a similar situation of having, you know, this condition applied?
The way the code provision is written right now is it's specifically for any properties that actually have those power lines along their frontage. So if maybe some of these properties to the west here along the National Way dead end here, they may not have power lines along their frontage.
And they might not have 250 feet.
That as well, yeah.
Okay.
But the code provision is
Power lines 250, we're doing the same thing.
correct.
Gotcha.
And if it's not on the other side of the street, it similarly would not apply.
And it's just and I appreciate, I think you're asking the right questions. That's the code requirement is the 250 feet, there have to be lines there. Just in case it was missed, because I think it's worth pointing out, this property is actually exactly 250 feet of frontage.
Yeah.
So that's
And-
sort of not lost on us.
Yeah.
And it's not a new building or a new business going in. It's actually
Existing.
putting in another work shed on an existing property. It does, I am a huge proponent of undergrounding utilities. That is one area that people stop me in the street and bend my ear about is why didn't we underground at the outlet mall? Why didn't we underground downtown? And it is very expensive, and I recognize that. We have to take a little bit from everybody to do it. But even when the city council had the ability to underground the utilities in our downtown corridor where we wanted to make a visual impact, the city itself chose not to because it was too expensive.
But look at how expensive it is now.
And it's even
I
more
mean,
expensive now.
That's it. You can't win with that because you know costs are going to go up.
Yes.
But
Is
I don't-
there, I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
I-
Commissioner Bartel.
I feel like it's not realistic to require the exact amount of 250 feet to be undergrounded or a full fee in lieu paid when it is not going to make a darn bit of difference along Highway 99 because nobody else is having to do it right now. It's going to be a huge project. It's going to cause lots of traffic issues. It's going to dig up the street. And for 250 feet, I feel like that I'm like Commissioner Ellsworth, I am 100% behind burying power lines and getting the utilities underneath where they're not going to be damaged by storms, etc. But I feel like something's missing here, and I don't think it's fair to require that when it almost is going to make it worse instead of making it better.
Well, eventually it'll be better.
Well, we hope so, but what if nobody ever buys anything else or wants to change anything along that street? I mean, then there's never going to be a requirement that anybody else do it. So we're going to have this 250 feet of buried power lines along with everything else that's up above the ground. And somebody will take a power pole out and it doesn't matter if they're underground for that 250 feet, everything's still going to go down.
Who did this measuring? You sure it's not 249?
Think the easements. Some easements here.
And
It's a tough one.
it is a tough one.
Yeah.
I want to be supportive of businesses, local businesses. I want to be supportive of growth, and I really want to underground the power lines. And the fee in lieu means that they're not going to be buried right now. It means that maybe somewhere else they will be buried if we have a large enough pot of money at some time. Again, this business is putting in another, I want to say shed. I know it's an actual building. It's an outbuilding.
But it's not
It's not
even anywhere
building.
near the street. It's on the opposite side of the property.
And right now, the
address is 99.
yeah, this piece here is 99.
Yeah.
Is there, anything to offset the upfront cost that over years that can alleviate some of the pressures of upfronting this?
You're asking like maybe some sort of economic development incentives or?
Yeah, something where, because again, I understand and I want to be supportive, but I personally don't think that I want to go down the road because I think we're gonna, we set a precedence of, well, I don't have enough money to do this and I don't have enough money to do this, and they're gonna pull at our heartstrings and we're all gonna keep saying no because of this, and I get it, and I own a business, I understand. But as a resident of this city, you do benefit from a beautiful piece of property at a very busy intersection. You do have a lot of advantages here, and I think going down this path is tough because this is gonna, as soon as this happens, I can see this happening over and over, and we're not going anywhere. And my feeling is, I think maybe we're stuck on the amount. It just seems a little steep for what is going on. I think that is. And you're right, you came down from a big number, which seems ridiculous now, even to this. And so I think we're maybe stuck on a number. I don't think this should completely go away, in my opinion. I think something should be contributed. Is that the correct number? I'm not smart enough to go down that road, but I think that's where I'm feeling a little bit of a uncertainty.
So it would be the 67,000.
67.
So we could leave, again, our options are to go ahead, put them up. There we go. To approve the request to remove the condition. So no fee. We could deny the request, but approve the amended amount at 67,715. Or we could keep the condition unchanged. So we could say, yeah, you have to pay the 147. No, we'll let you pay the 67, or remove it completely. My concern with adjusting the amount on the fly is that does make it a little bit even more difficult to say, okay, well, we'll say 35.
Right, yeah.
There's
That's the tough
no,
part.
no precedence, no.
Yeah.
Dan, could you tell us again what formula was used to change the number from the 147 to the 67,715?
Right. So when Chick-fil-A came in, my understanding is when Chick-fil-A came in and had to do the same fee in lieu or underground the utilities, they did an extensive study and came back to the city with the results of their study, and were able to show that the city was a little high in their estimates, and staff has decided to use that new calculation and that new data in making the determination of the fee in lieu amounts. And we had originally went with our existing calculations, which made it approximately 147. And the new calculations dropped it down to less than half of that. But this new number is based on what I would say is probably better data and more realistic data for the city of Woodburn.
And does it have anything to do with the fact that it's 250 feet? Or is it just,
It has nothing to do with the type of business. It has nothing to do with the amount of footage. It's simply based on what other cities and information on Woodburn itself. So it doesn't have anything to do with the business, how big the business, how small the business, doesn't have to do with the footage, but just using better data to calculate a reasonable fee in lieu.
No. Am I?
Is that correct?
Is that correct to say is?
I think that's right on the nose. Dan can add more. He's more familiar with where that data came from. But overall, I mean, you're right. The idea is we're trying to come up with the correct number.
We're trying to come
And
up
as-
with.
If and when we get better data on what that number should be, that's the one we use. And it's a good question as to, well, every site's different, right? So it costs more to bury here than somewhere else. That's true. But that's true of all of our fees. So I call it sort of the peanut butter approach, where we take the number that's realistic that you can apply on a linear foot basis. And on some sites, it might cost more money, and other sites, it might cost less money when we're doing those burials underground. And sometimes it might be cheaper for an applicant to do it themselves.
Yeah.
They look at the number and say, you know what, I've already torn up the front, I'm already putting in sewer, water, irrigation, sidewalks. I can just go through and put in the lines. So sometimes the applicants won't even choose that fee. They'll do it on their own. You see this more typically with, say, a subdivision, right? New subdivisions that come in, they're in there doing the work, running new lines. So it's just easier for them to put them down.
Yeah.
And bury them
Just
underground.
drop
It's
the
a little
lines in
cheaper
there.
than us to apply our linear foot number. But Dan, you might have a little bit more feedback on where those numbers come from.
Well, it comes from a per mile amount, not a per foot. So we kind of do the calculation to bring it down to a per foot so we can apply it to 250 feet of frontage. But it's based on kind of the bigger scale, more of what Chris was describing as the peanut butter approach.
So just so I understand this correctly, if I have a property with 300, you guys it's gonna be a different number based on that data, right? So it is gonna be more than this if it's a 300-foot frontage.
That's right. It's about like $270 per foot
Okay.
is what it boils down to.
well, I'm definitely happy we've got better data and it showed that the fees needed to be changed and made more reasonable. And I also agree with Commissioner Bravo, where we don't want to get in the habit of saying, okay, no, you don't have to pay, you don't have to pay, you don't have to pay. There is a cost and a reason behind all of these things.
I have one comment. You take a look at the pictures that showed the telephone pole. And then picture in my mind, okay, so you remove those and you bury the power lines. Not much different than burying cable television stuff. But anyway, aesthetically, does it make any difference for this one section? I don't think it does.
No, because they'd have to put in 3 poles.
Right.
Well, do we want to continue to deliberate? Do we want to entertain a motion?
A motion, I would think.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I will entertain a motion then. And I guess for everybody's benefit, we do not have to agree 100%. Each person can vote how they truly desire. We do not have to have consensus. So I would entertain a motion.
Dan, can you put up the sheet that had the 3 possible options on it?
Absolutely.
I would make a motion that for item MOC 23-02, Fleet Sales West Shop Building at 2175 North Pacific Highway, I would vote to deny the variance request, but approve amending condition number 6 to pay a fee in lieu in the amount of $67,715 as recommended by staff and presented in the staff report.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call vote on this one?
Certainly. Commissioner Lassen.
I'm thinking of this one to see. I understand what the applicant's saying, and you heard my other comments too. But I believe it's fair in all regards, and not to try and set a precedent, I would vote no.
Commissioner Bravo,
I would vote yes, on number 2.
Commissioner Berlin,
Yes.
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes,
Chair Ellsworth.
No. So I believe we have a vote of 3-2,
Yeah,
so
passed.
motion carries.
That's correct.
Okay. So the commission denies the variance request, but approves amending Commission 6 to pay a fee in lieu in the lesser amount of $67,715 as recommended by staff. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you for speaking.
Thank you. I can quickly give a lead in for the second item. This is DR 2206. I didn't write anything up for you, Madam Chair. I apologize for that.
Okay,
I think you got a memo that came out. This item's been continued a few times at the applicant's request. As you know, there's a 120-day clock that they have. They've extended it and continued it. So staff supports giving them this requested extension. It would take a motion and a vote from you all. If you wanted to continue, it would just take a motion from you to continue this until October 12th, 2023. Is that
Okay.
correct, Colin? Did I miss any?
yes. I would entertain a motion to continue the hearing on DR 22-06 to be continued until October 12th of 2023.
Second.
I would entertain a motion.
I move we continue the DR 2206 1030 Young Street Apartments Consolidated Land Use Application Package Public Hearing to October 12th, 2023.
We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye. I heard no opposed. Motion carries. Okay, and we are moving into the public hearing for LA 2103, which is a legislative amendment to the Woodburn Development Ordinance related to the tree preservation and removal. I'm going to look to our commission to see if we're ready to discuss trees tonight. And if not, I would ask for a continuance, but it looks like we're ready to talk about trees,
We put it off a couple times.
right? And since it's a legislative hearing, would you do the honors?
Absolutely. So we haven't done a legislative item in a while. So just to give just a real quick, easy summary. Anytime we make a modification to the comprehensive plan or to our WDO or zoning code, you are now sitting as a legislative body, not on a quasi judicial item. So there's no specific project, right? So it's a legislative decision that you'll be making. Technically, you're required by law to pass a motion with a recommendation for the city council on the item that you have in front of you. There's literally no more detail than that. Depending on how it goes, and I say this because if, say, there isn't agreement on one or two different particular items, it's perfectly fine. All that has to happen is the recommendation that you make, just be clear to staff. And what's going to happen is staff's going to write a memo to the city council and say, it was this, the adopted or the recommended amendment, say, to the tree code that we're talking about here, was heard by the planning commission. They had 6+, I think, work sessions on it. And at the end of the day, this is the proposal that they recommended to you. And then I'll point out if there's dissenting opinions about something in particular, one or two elements, I can present those to the council. What you're really doing is you're giving the council really good information saying, we looked at it, this is our opinion. And if some people don't agree, it's perfectly fine. The council may not agree as well. Doesn't change the fact that you'll be making a recommendation to move up. That's assuming you're all in favor of making a recommendation and moving forward. As you've done before, you always have the option of saying, we want to chew on this some more. There's no time certain element to it. And in terms of the process, legislative items, again, are pretty loose. We don't have the tight requirements that we do for quasi judicial hearings. I have up on the board, it's still a public hearing. So you're going to follow the hearing procedures. I don't see anybody here in the room, but we're still going to walk through a few of those pieces. I put little red dots on the items you don't have to read through. And again, when you're making motions and having discussions, feel free to be pretty loose about it, as long as we're specific at the end about exactly what kind of motion and edits you want to pass on to the council with your recommendation. And Colin's going to walk through it all.
Thank you. Good evening. This is Colin Cortez, Senior Planner speaking. Give me a moment and I will load a PowerPoint for tonight's discussion.
And I didn't check. Can you hear me, Mackenzie?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, you were oddly quiet as I was making a lot of legal comments here. So
That's because you were doing everything as I would have done it if I was there in the room.
All right. So it'll be a short slide presentation because most of the content, of course, you will have been talking about, heard about many times before. So we'll dive right in. So for those of you who are newer to the commission, a little background. So more than 2 years ago, there was a giant ice storm that pummeled the city, took down a lot of trees, and the aftermath of dealing with that led the council to say, we need to improve the tree regulations. Staff, please get on that. So the council duly tasked a resolution to that effect. And from then on, the commission held at least 6 workshops, as the director mentioned, leading up to tonight. And here's a 2-slide quick and dirty summary of what the amendment would accomplish. First thing to remind everyone about is it's relevant only to private property. So we're not talking about street trees and we're not talking about trees in city parks. It's just what's on private property. There'll be a change to the definition of what is a significant tree. That comes under the review of regulation. There'll be some new definitions added to the development ordinance, such as hat racking, which talks about how much of a tree can be pruned before it becomes mutilation. And then key concepts like what is a root protection zone in terms of protection. We are making much clearer to explain and administer how to measure a tree, including illustrations to go with that. We're adding a clear purpose statement with the bulleted list. You might remember Commissioner Corning had an opinion about how to order the purpose items in that statement, and staff duly went ahead and revised that statement accordingly. There are some exemptions that are spelled out. So there's a table in the amendment with a list of invasive species that are actively harmful. So those are exempt. People who want to remove an invasive tree would not need any sort of review. Any commercial orchards, timber farm, that sort of thing. And then for new growth areas, where there would be widened streets, extended streets, or new streets, if there are existing trees that are in the path of those streets, those would be exempt as well. The idea being that the city doesn't want to force developers into a bind from competing priorities. Improvements include outlining the content for an arborist report that would be required for review. There's a number of tiers of regulations that are tailored to the context of a tree being removed. The 2 basic contexts are for what's on the landscape today. People develop properties that are not doing any additional kind of construction or redevelopment or addition. And then the case where there is development, particularly a major change happening on a property. For new developments, there's minimum percentages of significant trees to preserve. And for trees that are approved to be removed, whatever the property in question, those who get permit approval will be required to mitigate through new plantings as replacements or pay fees in lieu of those plantings. And then lastly, for trees that are being preserved, we would be adding to the development ordinance some standards about how contractors would actually accomplish preservation during construction. For example, having portable metal fencing put around the tree to prevent contractor storage of materials or backing up earth moving equipment into trees, that sort of thing. And then I'll conclude by saying that the way it's structured now is all significant trees that be proposed to be removed will require some sort of scrutiny by staff before an action is allowed to happen. That's the basic sum up of how it stands today. And in terms of what would happen, there's a number of fees that would be necessary to practically carry out the new regulations. Fees, for example, about how much someone would pay specifically if they did not want to plant a replacement tree. Fees that would serve as a disincentive to remove trees. Or another way to think of it is the fee that someone would pay for the privilege of removing a tree if they got approval to do so. Page 4 of the staff report presented a table that we talked about at least one work session prior. And staff definitely is looking to get your recommendation as a commission about what the fee policy should be per council.
And you're mentioning that because I know it sounds odd, but the actual fee for, say, a tree removal or a replacement isn't actually in our WDO, so it's not a decision that the planning commission actually makes. That's a city council decision, has to make decisions on fees and what they are. But as Colin pointed out, we're looking for some kind of recommendation, and he gave you some ideas in there on wherever that page was.
Mm-hmm.
But if the city doesn't have anything to do with it, why are they charging?
What this is, if it's sort of, think of it as a fee and look, just like we just covered, in this case for a tree.
The way I would describe it is today for a tree removal permit, there's an application fee, but there's no other fees that would be charged. So the idea is, for example, if someone had the opinion that the city's policy should be to discourage people from removing significant trees, the idea would be to have a fee at all for the privilege of removing a tree. And then the idea might be that it would be a higher dollar amount as a disincentive. Whereas some other person might be inclined to say, well, it's okay to charge a fee to dissuade people from removal, but maybe it shouldn't be too much.
Or
So
maybe it should be more.
well, yeah. Well, I mean, what I'm getting at is based on your opinions as individual commissioners and as a majority of the commission, we're looking for your feedback about what the council should do in terms of fees. Because they're going to have to set fees, and it would be helpful for them to have input about what those fees should be. So I'll start wrapping up the presentation by summarizing that the tiers, the way the tree removals are regulated. This is a much shorter summary of the way it's presented in the amendment. So it goes from somewhat less scrutiny to more scrutiny. So basically, if you have a home and there's no construction or development, it's relatively straightforward. Again, you still need reasons, as would be outlined in the amendment, to remove a tree. You'd need to make application to remove, and if approved, you'd still need to do some kind of mitigation, which would be planting or paying a fee in lieu, the amount to be determined. For other existing properties, be it a duplex, strip mall, office park, industrial park, there's a little more level of scrutiny, but essentially it's regulated much the same. The third and fourth tiers all relate to new development. So someone is doing some sort of addition or tear down and building new, anything like that. And it's divided into something modest, essentially something that's residential with not too many more dwellings, and then every other kind of development. So for example, if someone was building on a lot in an existing neighborhood, a new house, the third tier would be the one that would apply. Whereas someone doing an entirely new subdivision, an apartment complex, they would be in the fourth tier. And the third and fourth tiers have in common that there's specific standards set. The trees that don't otherwise qualify for removal because they're dead or they're hazardous or some of the other reasons that are outlined in the amendment, a developer would have to preserve a minimum percentage of those trees. So if you have 100 trees on a property for a subdivision and say 20 of them are dead or dying, that leaves 80. In some cases, the minimum would be 50%, so 40 out of 80. And it's a simplified example because there could very well be new properties on the edge of the urban growth boundary that were farms, and so they don't have many trees to begin with. So the resulting numbers can be very different property by property. And then the last tier accounts for annexation. And this helps staff give a little more scrutiny to situations where particularly someone's applied to bring property into the city, but they haven't necessarily proposed a specific development yet. So it helps us work with applicants to understand that if they haven't already cut down trees with county permission, they've applied to annex to the city, they should hold off removing any trees before they go through review with the city. And then there's not much more to say about the fee slide other than it mimics what's in the staff report. And if you're inclined to talk about the specific dollar amounts, we can come back to the slide or page 4 of the report. And so it leads to the staff recommendation. It's 2 basic parts. So we gladly ask that you continue holding the public hearing about LA 2103. And then specifically that the commission consider the staff report and attachments. And then a majority of commissioners motion to recommend approval to the city council of the amendment. And then recommend upon fees to the city council. And then as the director emphasized, staff would be happy to note and forward to the council any kind of individual comments or dissents. And that's it, unless there are any questions right away.
It's all said and done and printed and whatever.
Mhm.
Can we enclose this whole thing in one of the city bills so that everybody has it?
Yes, so we'll forward the draft that's in your packet tonight to the council, along with your recommendation and any comments. And then, of course, the council will have to create a bill of its own to pass this legislation.
Exactly, whatever the final.
Right. And it would be available publicly like other council agendas.
No, I think it should be mailed to every household.
Yeah, you want some kind of note, you mean once it's finished,
Yeah, once it's
let people
completed.
know that there's new requirements,
Yeah.
new regulations. et
Because
cetera.
otherwise they all say, oh, I didn't know, or, whatever.
Yeah, we have a couple ways of doing that. Well, happy to do it because we want notice to get out to people that there's a new system, a new process we're going through. No, it would be really helpful. We have a lot of different ways to do it. Whether it's water bill, it's
Yeah.
all the other things.
Water
Yeah.
bill, e-blast.
Oh, yeah.
all
Exactly.
sorts of
But
things.
everybody doesn't read the e-blast, but you
Right,
get your
but yeah.
water bill.
Oh,
I find it ironic that we want to mail paper to every single household and paper
What?
comes from taking down trees. I find it ironic that we want to mail something to every single household. And if we need to do that, we're cutting down trees with paper.
Good point.
Well, duly noted, we'll make definite efforts to publicize it.
So just a question now. So with this new process, the application is still in the process, just there's no fee for an application. There's just a fee for the removal of trees.
As it stands today, there's an application fee,
Right.
but there's no other kind of fee.
So
So we're asking
if
for an
this,
application and a
A
removal
permit,
fee.
isn't it a permit fee or?
so if this gets drafted and approved by council, the way you have it here, application still in play, fee for an application, then fee for the tree removal as well.
The fee for an application would stay the same unless the council decided to change it. What could happen though is if, for example, a homeowner could come to us and say, I did apply for a removal permit. I got your approval from you, staff, but I'd like to, pay money instead of planting a replacement tree. How much is it? And our immediate response without the council having done something would be, we don't know. The council hasn't told us what the fee amount is.
So what do you do now?
Well, first we get your recommendation about policy generally.
Okay.
And then we go to the council and say, besides this amendment to the development ordinance, council, we need you to adopt specific fees so we staff can carry out fully the provisions of this amendment. So, I mean, when people apply for permits, they want clear, simple, straight answers, and we
I
like
guess
to be
my
able to give
question
that
is,
to them.
what's the process now for determining the fee? How does that get calculated now?
Short answer is there isn't one.
Okay, so it's just someone. So what happens, I guess, I've never applied for a tree permit to remove it. I guess what does happen? I mean, because you guys have issued permits, right? I mean, assuming.
We do. Right now, is it $220?
Yep.
to submit the application, assuming they get one.
Mhm.
We come back and say, you need to plant another tree on site, right? What we don't have right now is this option to not put it on site, because a lot of times people are like, I cut down the tree because
I don't want.
right, I didn't want that tree there. So whenever we have development approvals, you'll notice, if you look through our conditions, you can see pretty much any subdivision, any commercial project that comes before you where they're cutting down significant trees. We, staff, have been applying a fee in there. I don't even recall what it was. Colin would know better than me, but we do it when we have that opportunity. That's a condition of approval. But for the one-off homeowner items, we don't have one right now.
Gotcha.
Yeah, where we can condition developments, we do so because we can specify the fee. But if we can't, there's no fee schedule that we
Right.
can turn to.
Okay.
Right.
Gotcha. So this just makes it cleaner. There's something you can turn to and everyone's aware of the same guidelines.
That's right.
And like with the last discussion, if a homeowner doesn't want to plant a tree and decides to pay a fee in lieu, that goes into a pot. And the city can plant trees where it makes sense,
Gotcha.
like in the park or some other area.
Mhm.
So they keep a pot of money to do that. We want to encourage people to either not cut down the trees or plant trees
Right.
to
Right.
replace them. But sometimes it just doesn't make sense, like you said.
Chair
So there's a
Ellsworth?
pool to put some in other areas where it does make sense.
Yeah, I'll add that looking at the table, I mean, the policy that's kind of implied in the table is for homeowners. The proposal kind of goes easy on them in terms of removal. And then particularly for developers of larger projects on the tier 4, you can see there's quite a bit of oomph in terms of please don't remove significant trees.
Yeah.
And
Chair
what about the
Ellsworth?
significant-
I hear,
Apologies.
I can't tell if it's Commissioner
Mackenzie.
Bartel or Mackenzie. Okay.
If the commission would allow me just for a couple of minutes to talk about the implementation of fees. I just think it might be helpful as part of your discussion. Because this, for the council to adopt these fees, even as part of your recommendation, it is a secondary legislative process. And so I wanted to kind of talk through that if now would be an appropriate time.
Absolutely. Please.
Okay, so, you guys right now, in terms of your legislative, recommendation to the council is really on the strict language of the Woodburn Development Ordinance. So, the regulations on, what trees can be cut down when. And the piece about fees is that the fee table that we're looking at right now would have to become part of what the city calls a master fee schedule, which is actually a separate ordinance. Of course, we're asking you right now to kind of consider a recommendation to council along with the WDO updates and amendments. And, if, the council is looking at the WDO amendments that, you guys would be recommending this evening, part of that, as Colin mentioned, includes, some of these removal fees or fees in lieu of planting, these mitigation fees. And so, we wouldn't recommend to the council to, update the WDO and, implement certain policy decisions that, require fees without also updating a master fee schedule to adopt fees to go along with that. But I do want you to know that that's a separate process. And so, just making the WDO changes is one piece, but the city would actually also be amending its master fee schedule to adopt, these fees or others. But again, they go hand in hand because we don't want to adopt policy considerations or have, policies in the WDO that we can't also implement on the fee schedule side of things. Any questions about that piece? I just wanted to be clear that, it's really two legislative processes that basically run concurrently, and I wouldn't recommend to the council to adopt any policies without consideration of, of new fee schedule. But they really are, separate legislative components.
Thank you.
Why do we charge a fee? If somebody wants to cut the tree down, they can get a permit, but
That's an administrative cost for us to actually do the application, take it in.
what do you do? I mean,
Us?
You go and look at it?
It depends on what it is. So we have people in Public Works, we often send to look at trees.
Right.
And there's an application that they submit. that we have to review. We
Okay.
we usually call them, then we oftentimes have a back and forth with the homeowner who comes in, and then we may take a look at the tree and we make our determination.
Okay.
And what is it, $220?
Yep.
Okay.
And as an FYI, I don't think I have ever not refunded a fee if I've turned down an application. Looking at these two,
Oh,
That's
it's
fine.
just been my executive decision. So you probably guessed when someone walks in, I don't say, great, pay the money, and then I'll look at it. I say, let's talk about this first. Or the planners that we have at the counter will say, well, let's see if you're really going to be able to get this approved before you waste your money and submit an application. So it's pretty rare that we take the money and then say, yep, you're definitely denied. Thanks for spending that time and effort. Those are pretty rare. We usually have pretty good conversations with people up front about whether or not they're going to meet the criteria.
Well, I think that staff has done a pretty good job of listening to us in our 6 different hearings or workshops. And I think we've got something that we could recommend at this point. I didn't see anything that glaringly stood out. Did anybody else?
No.
No.
And I do think the fee schedule seems reasonable, and I believe the council will do whatever the council needs to do. Do we need to have, after listening to Mackenzie, do we need 2 different motions? One to recommend the changes to the WDO and one to
I
consider.
I can't look to Mackenzie to tap me on the shoulder and say, no. I'll be honest with you. I don't think you even need a motion on the fee
Okay,
schedule item. We'd like your input. I think are these reasonable, unreasonable? Do you think they're going in the right direction? I think that'd be helpful, but there's no motion or
Okay.
recommendation necessary or even appropriate from you on the fee schedule. I think it's good to have that input.
so
That counts.
personally, I think that the fee schedule that was in the staff report looks reasonable. I really appreciate that we want homeowners to be informed and make informed decisions, and we're not trying to strong arm them. But I also like that larger, more complex developments have to make a concentrated effort, or there's a little bit of a pain point financially if they're going to just cut down significant trees.
Yeah.
So I do like that tiered approach and the graduated costs for the bigger projects.
Can I ask one thing? If about street trees that the city owns, and it's the responsibility of the homeowner, is that part of what we're talking about here?
No, that wouldn't be applicable. So you need to go to and talk to our Public Works Department about taking down a tree that's essentially not on their property. It's in the right of way in front of.
Right, but the homeowner is responsible for the.
They are. Nothing we're discussing at all in here
Okay.
relates to that whatsoever.
Right.
And again, we're talking about the significant trees. It's not, you want to go take down a twig.
Yeah.
that's in-
Yeah.
Your apple tree that's old and rotting, because they're not going to be 24 inches across.
Those are all exemptions. That's correct. These are only for larger trees.
Yeah.
We have a new way of measuring. And again, it even exempts things like orchards, as Colin talked about.
Right.
If it's a grove, the hazelnut grove that was up on, a couple of them up off Boone's Ferry, they're not paying, those aren't significant trees. That was a farm. And there was no penalty for that.
Commissioner Bartel, do you have anything that you want to add?
I don't know. I'm a little bit torn. I 100% agree with the T3, T4 and annexation tiers. I'm struggling a little bit still with tier 1 and tier 2 with not overextending just a person who has a house who wants to take a bad tree down and put a new tree up. I mean, they still have to pay the application fee, and then they have to pay somebody to take the tree down, and then they have to buy a new tree and
Right.
plant it. So I'm feeling like there's hidden fees that are maybe implied but not on the fee schedule, and that does concern me a little bit. I like the graduated fee schedule, and I think the description of the different tiers seems good. But I still feel like tier 1, it doesn't matter if you mail somebody a piece of paper from a tree you killed saying you have to apply and do all of this stuff. They're just going to do it and say they didn't know. And do we have a tree police that's going to go around? And so I almost feel like we shouldn't waste any more time talking about tier 1, as long as we're not going to go completely off the rails and charge a lot of stuff. But sorry, I think I've talked to myself in circles. I apologize.
No. Any other discussion and deliberation? Are we ready to recommend this be given to the city council?
Sure.
All right, can you go back to the recommended language for a motion? Okay, I would entertain a motion.
I would give a motion if I knew what to say.
Yeah.
It's kind of my night to do that.
Make a motion to,
We're bringing it onto the screen right now for you, Commissioner.
motion to recommend that the council approve legislative amendment LA 21-03 and fees as recommended in the staff report.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Yay.
Thank you all. And thank
Wow,
you,
I
staff,
feel like
for
we
all your
should
work
have
on this.
cocktails. I feel like we should have
What?
cocktails now. That was a long one.
Cocktails on with her. Celebratory.
I know, seriously, that was longer than a pregnancy. Jeez.
Oh, all right. That brings us to updates from staff. Do we have any updates from staff?
I do indeed. As much as you loved, hold on for a moment. Should scare you. I turned my microphone off. I couldn't see that. So I can free my hands up. Since you enjoyed doing that WDO amendment so much, I have several more queued up. But that's what it is. So I provided you all a copy of a memo that I gave to the city council, see where I put it, about another set of WDO amendments, modifications to the zoning code. Trying to think where I put it. Oh, I got it. Excuse me. And I thought I'd just quickly run down them and I'll give you a little heads up as to what these are about. So as you know, or you might know, might not know, prior to initiating any kind of modification to the zoning code or making a change to the comprehensive plan, the process actually starts with me going to the city council and getting them to initiate that process via resolution. So I have to say, here's what we're looking to do. I need to do a master plan. I kind of lay it out. And this makes sense, right? Because they may say, that's a terrible idea. I don't want you to spend a year and a half on that. So they have to initiate that process for me to do any of those steps. Then that kickstarts it. And then I come to you and we kind of walk through the process like we did with trees, where we start crafting the code, come back with drafts, take testimony, ultimately make a recommendation. So I went to the city council this was August 28th, maybe the first September meeting. I think I might have taken it to them. And I walked them through some changes, just a long laundry list of changes that I wanted them to consider and give some authorization for us, the planning commission, to explore and look at, coming in and making some more changes to the WDO. Don't kid yourself. I have a list of WDO changes that's longer than the WDO, right? But I need to prioritize which ones are the most important. It's a fine document, but it's not perfect. It's really hard it's never going to be perfect, but it does a pretty good job. And there are some areas that I wanted to highlight, things that I mentioned to the council, and I'll give you their feedback on them, these items that I talked about. But at the end of the day, they blessed moving forward with these. What that means is staff is going to start the process of looking at these various items in here. And before the end of the meeting, I'll explain why you're probably not going to see them very soon, but we will start that process. All right. I just wanted to give you some feedback. Give you let you know what these are, and you can give me any kind of initial feedback you have on or something in particular of interest to you. So I talk about a couple areas that are, I think, bigger changes to the WDO. They might actually be their own separate projects, like the tree code was its own baby because it's one thing. A lot of modifications to the WDO, I can just run through a whole litany of line items in there to fix. The biggest one, the first one I have on here has to do with what are called mobile food kitchens in our code. These are food trucks. I know this was touched on right before I started here 7 or 8 years ago. It was looked at and contemplated. They're pretty challenging to work on. There's a lot of issues around it. What I wrote down in here as my kind of general description was the WDO currently permits food trucks with minimal review and regulation in our industrial zones. So essentially you can open a food truck and put it in the industrial zone with a few very, very minor, like just don't put it in the drive aisle or something requirements. And you can also get one as part of a special event permit. Like when we have Fiesta, when we have something downtown, you have the Woodburn Eats Food.
Taste of Woodburn.
Taste of Woodburn. These things, right? These get them set up for a special event. It runs all weekend. And we have the fire district look at it to make sure it's safe. Sometimes we'll have a plan that they give us about what kind of signage they're going to put up, et cetera. And that's how those are approved right now in the city. This is just my opinion and why I thought it was worthwhile. I don't know that that covers enough. I think they should be examined a little more closely. That's my 2 cents. I don't like that they're kind of getting slipped in as temporary uses, and a lot of them are just appearing on street corners as a temporary use that they can stay open for, say, 30, 60 days a year.
60 days, I think.
Right, a
consecutive
calendar
days.
year, right, but they can break them up and then they're only open on weekends and it winds up staying there for 18 months, but it's only open. It's very odd. I don't think that was the intent of the special use permit. I could be wrong, but I want us to look at that. And what's really worthwhile is food trucks and food carts of something that other cities have really worked pretty hard on. And I think we see a lot of pretty successful examples of how they can work in a community. Our code doesn't do that. And I think it's worth looking at that and exploring if there might be a better way. The council was not in 100% agreement as to what that should be. That's going to be a fun topic. I don't know, you don't have to come up with answers, but I definitely think it's worth looking at. I don't like that we're pretty silent about it. I'd rather have some kind of plan for how we address them rather than what we currently do. I want us to look closer at some street improvement thresholds. This has to do with when street improvements are required, similar to what you heard earlier tonight about how do we draw the line for 250 feet and how much of a development do we require X amount of improvements. They can be challenging, especially with non-conforming redevelopments. We've modified this a few times since I've been here. I want to keep looking at it. It's a real challenge and it's very impactful on developers or on applicants. It can stop certain businesses from opening. And on the other hand, it's tough to draw that line and say, well, if I just wave everybody through, we're never going to get the improvements we want to see. It's a hard question. I just want to spend some more time on it. And we can look at that more closely about how it's done, look at how some other cities do it. We need to make a few more tweaks regarding middle housing. This is pretty simple. All middle housing, which if you've forgotten is duplex, triplex, quadplex, cottage housing. Did I get that?
Townhouse.
And townhouse. The state's wonderful phrase. We are not allowed to apply any subjective criteria to that, period. And our code, we tried to do this before, but the state has already given me some feedback on a recent application that said you need to tighten it up. So we need to make a few more tweaks in there to meet requirements. I talk about temporary marketing, special event permits again. I don't think they're being, I think we need to look at those closely. It's kind of odd the way we currently regulate. I hear from the fire department that they have issues with how we're authorizing them. So we need to spend some more time on it. Just real quick, I'll do these. These are smaller, simpler changes. The way we measure fence heights, and particularly we're on top of walls. I know this is a minor thing, but we often have a retaining wall with a fence on it. And so where do you measure that fence height from? It seems silly, but it's a little more challenging, you might think. we have some policies and some best practices we're going to apply to it. This is the next one's worth discussing just for a second. You might have heard me mention this before. This has to do with non-conforming signs. So these are signs that were built in the city, which are perfectly legal signs, before the code changes have happened. So usually if a sign was built 25 years ago, it doesn't meet our current regulations, but it's still a legal sign and someone can keep that sign for as long as they want. But once they come in and do changes to it, they have to meet the new code requirements. There's a provision in our WDO that says that all non-conforming signs need to either be brought into conformance or removed. That's a very challenging piece of language. You probably guess what that means. I'd have to go out and look at every single sign in the city, make a determination as to whether it was legally non-conforming or illegal, and then cite them and say, you're gonna have to get rid of that sign. That's perfectly legal because we made a decision that's non-conforming. I'm gonna be frank, that's a terrible code provision, and I catch flack because I know the council approved it about a decade ago. But I don't care. I still think it's a stupid code provision. And it's got to come out of your code because there's no way in the world we're going to tell every single person with a non-conforming sign that it's got to be gone. It's just an incredibly,
Yes.
it's challenging. So when I brought this up to the council, I think they were in agreement with that. With my
20 years ago, it seemed like so far.
I know,
away.
I know. It's a great thing to say, all right, every sign's got to be gone in exactly 20 years and put it in the code. Well, 20 years have come and I'm like, well, what do you want me to do about it? Start citing everybody. I can't do it. But I do think that we have a problem with illegal signs in town. My experience and my opinion is that most people don't have issues with non-conforming signs. It's typically illegal signs around town that are a problem. There's a big difference. A non-conforming sign was legal once, and maybe it's in the wrong spot on the site, or maybe we wouldn't allow them that big anymore. And there are some of those, but the vast majority of complaints are, they say, what's that doing there? I said, it's not supposed to be there. It's illegal. It needs to be removed. They need to be cited for it. So I think there's a better way to look at dealing with the
But there's,
signage issues.
once again, there's
Yeah.
no enforcement because downtown windows are supposed to be 50% max with signs. And they're all completely covered, but nobody does anything. So what's the point?
Jamie's down there more than you can imagine.
But nothing
Changing it,
changes.
and then it comes back and it goes back to it, right? But you're right, that the issue is illegal signs, not, those aren't legal.
But they're illegal in the sense that they're covering more of an area
Well,
than they're supposed to.
That's correct. Those are illegal, right? And I think there's a better way, there might be a better way to address it, whether it's code enforcement.
You give them a ticket or you fine them where there has to be a consequence. There are no consequences in this city for any violation of ordinances or anything else. They want to educate everybody. Well, that doesn't always work. So, do I sound harsh? I mean every word.
I need to work on putting together some quote model home requirements in our code. A lot of the new subdivisions often have model homes that they put together, that they put in place. These are treated differently than a CO that we put on a house. They aren't meant for living in. It's literally what it sounds like. We don't have any provisions in our code for it. We need to. I've done my own policies that I put in place to make it happen, but I don't want to keep doing that. I want them to be written in the code, reviewed correctly. I want to look.
Question about that, Chris? They sell
sorry.
them. When the development's filled, they sell them. If they're not built like a regular house and that's okay, how come it's okay to sell them to people to move in? That's what they do.
Right. So the way it should work is we have a model home that's treated a certain way. And oftentimes we run those dry, right? So no one's going to sell the house because it's not going to be hooked up to anything. And then once they're basically moving out, right? Once Lennar is up to selling its last home, they hook that up and they sell it. Or they, I'm sorry, Colin, or they.
No, I wanted to chime in that when the director uses the word dry in this context, what he means is not hooked up to utilities that give water and sewer.
I'm sorry about that.
So yeah, another piece of lingo from our field of work.
Which is one approach that a lot of cities use. They say, great, you can have your model home, everything's fine, but it's not hooked up to water sewer. That way, they're not paying SDCs. They oftentimes prefer that. And they can drop this sort of model home out there. I think of a kind of Arrested Development house that you see sitting out there on the old TV show, right? That's a model home that they just have sitting out there, the first thing they built to sell. We don't have anything in our code about it right now, and it's easy enough to write. Again, there's nothing dangerous. There's no risk for the city. But I don't have anything that lets them come in early and drop a single model house on. We should have something in our code. I want to look a little closer at some exterior lighting requirements we have, particularly as they relate to industrial uses. And just as an example of where some of these ideas come from, I mean, I get them generally from staff, things we hear at the counter, but also variances, right? When I get 3 or 4 variance requests, or I hear from applicants who I think are being sincere about a code provision that's like truly onerous, or when I hear that, I think, maybe we're going too far, or we haven't written this right, or we need to reevaluate. And this is one of those examples. We've had a couple of requests for variances for industrial lighting heights or light poles in industrial areas. It's something that we recently adopted. So I think it's worth looking at again to make sure we're getting it right.
Do we have anything to do with streetlights?
Nothing at all. I'm sorry. Those are public works. They're PGE lights, actually. They're not in ours, but they're theirs, and we just pay the electric bill on them. Some more details on conditional use standards. This is more of a cleanup issue. It's not even worth discussing at this point. And again, a few tweaks to our zoning adjustments and variance requirements. So that's kind of that's a litany of things. I fully expect 3 or 4 of those to get pulled out as like, let's just separately look at food trucks. Let's separately look at this signage problem. But I'd like to put the other ones in a bigger package. Now, bringing it to your attention because I went to the council, they said, great, go forward and do it. I don't have a time frame for that because I'm going to talk for a second about what else is on our upcoming agendas, but if you don't mind. We have, as you probably noticed, we have a slight slowdown in our quasi-judicial hearings that we've had. In the past 4 months, I'll bet we've had 4 quasi-judicial items, private developments that have come in. And we probably have 1 a month kind of scheduled to come in here going forward, which is fine. Slow down considering the way things were for the past 3 years. But we have a big buildup on these legislative items. We have a lot of comprehensive plan and master plan modification staffs working on and kicking off. I want to make you aware of them because those are going to be coming before you for recommendations to go to the city council on. The next one you're going to hear about, the most immediate, is called an economic opportunities analysis. This is just what it sounds like. Our comprehensive plan relies on data in order to come up with different policies and to make funding decisions. And the data that it relies on for, say, economic development items and industrial lands and where to do improvements in these various places are based on what we call this analysis that the state requires us to do. So it includes it includes employment buildable lands inventory. So the state, in their wisdom, as an aside, every time we touch our comprehensive plan, we have to follow a lot of state statutes and administrative rules that we have to follow. So we follow those very, very closely. When we, the city, make modifications to our comprehensive plan to change and adopt the new economic opportunities analysis, we have to look at all the buildable lands in the city for commercial and industrial uses, make a decision as to which ones are vacant, which ones are buildable. And the point of that is to compare that to our growth for the next 20 years and figure out, probably see where this is leading, if we're getting close to our build out, right? When you think about the big Amazons and you think about the spec development and things that were recently approved, those take up a lot of industrial land. And one of the things that local governments are supposed to do in this state is look ahead and keep a 20-year supply of buildable lands, both for residential purposes and for employment purposes. So we have our last update was 2001 when this was last amended. We did a tweak to it in 2015 when we did our EGB amendment. We adopted a new targeted industries analysis. So this is a very technical analysis that we do. What it's going to indicate when it's done is whether or not the city's getting built out with our employment lands, whether or not we're running out of industrial and commercial space. And if it shows a need, according to the state's rules, then we're supposed to look at other improvements we can make to our code to make those redevelopable sites more developable, right? The whole purpose of Oregon land use planning is to build it here in our urban growth boundary and not expand. So you have vacant sites, get them built, right? Make them more, get rid of development restrictions and regulations and spend more infrastructure spending to make sure that somebody can build on those lands before we look to expand. We think we're probably going to, it's probably going to indicate that we definitely need to expand, which would lead to a different process of expanding our urban growth boundary for industrial uses. That EOA process, we've been working on for a while. In fact, Commissioner Corning is on the technical advisory group for that body. They've been meeting for probably 4 months, I want to say 6 months, looking at some of the statistics, analysis, population numbers, all the fun stuff. It's a very technical document. I'm working with Renata Wakely, getting the last name, Renata Wakely here at the city, and she's going to be at our next meeting and give you a more detailed description of what that EOA is. And then about 30 days from now, we expect to come in, or 45 days from now, we expect to come in with an actual proposal for you to consider, look at, and make a recommendation for the council.
Are you telling us how thick the package is?
It is. That's why. So I have a few of these. So that one's more immediate. You're going to see that one in about 45 days. But I wanted to give you an introduction to it at your next planning commission meeting, just to kind of let you know what to expect when it comes in, so you're not sort of caught by surprise. I'm also working on a park, well, not I am, the city's also working on a Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Fantastic, fun plan that looks at the same question in the next 20 years. What do we need in terms of parks for the population growth we're expecting? Where are our deficiencies? How are we going to pay for it? What should our parks look like? Do we need trails in certain areas? What should those trails look like? Where should they go? All these, that's like the funnest plan we work on because everybody gets excited about it. Go ahead, Colin.
And there's an online open house open until October 1st.
Yeah.
So that's an ongoing project we've been working on. I will have, again, I'll give you an introduction to that project, probably like a 20-30 minute presentation about what it entails before we actually have our public hearing on it. At the same time, I have one more that's in the works. I'm doing a modification to the city's transportation system plan to specifically look at the southwest corridor of our community. We've had a tremendous amount of growth going on over there. And our transportation system plan has quickly become outdated in terms of what kind of needs and finances we need to put in place out there. So we have just started that project. It's probably you'll probably see it in the spring, but I want to let you know that we're also doing that modification. Modifying these master plans is really, really important because those master plans get adopted as a part of our comprehensive plan, and they guide the development that happens after the fact. Great examples, easy ones are, we don't know where to put trails, when to ask for trails, when developers, if we don't have an approved master plan. When we needed parks up at, say, the Dove Landing project up on Boones Ferry Road, we relied on the parks plan that said we have a deficiency for a community park, neighborhood park, whatever it was called up there, of X size. And we need it in that area. And we could work with the developer to give us that land as part of the PUD. And then the facilities and amenities that it has are listed in these are the things we want to see in these plans. Right, these kinds of trails, these kinds of amenities, these kinds of whatever it might be, benches all the way down. Those things are really critical. It starts as a master plan, right? All the way from the transportation system plan that says, this is where the road connections are going to be. Here's how much it's going to cost for a new signal there. Then we can work with applicants and say, you need to pony up X amount of money because of your impacts at that intersection that we already know is at capacity in 5 years, and it's going to cost X amount of money. So those are critical. They're drier. People tend to not see them, right? The community tends to be honest. They don't get as involved in a transportation system plan.
But yet,
They're critical.
everybody mentions traffic.
Right.
Right.
And it's, just sort of ignored.
It is. So we're glad to get in front of those and update those plans as often as we can. I'm happy to see it happen. And when you're looking at it, I do hope you're thinking of it under the kind of veil of when this is done, what's it going to mean for that plan when he walks in the door, right? When an applicant comes in and we say, you know what, we had a long discussion about seeing a connection behind your property because it connects to Mill Creek, right? And that trail is critical. We need that connection. We spent a lot of time on a trail plan for it. And that's how we know to work with that applicant on getting an easement there or maybe getting money for those improvements. Without it, we're kind of flying blind. And frankly, it makes it much more difficult for us and for you to legally condition people to get those improvements if they aren't on a master plan. I hope you're hearing that part. That's why I want these on a master plan and in our CIP, or ultimately our capital improvement program. I know they're dry and dull. They're really important. And I think I'm almost done. Next meeting will be the 12th. We'll have that Young Street project we just continued. And I'm going to give you an introduction, and Renato will be here to talk about the EOA as well. And thank you for volunteering to go to the training session on Saturday, Madam Chair. And I believe Commissioner Corning is going as well.
Okay.
And if anyone wants more training, let me know. I can always find different types of training if you're all interested in such things. I appreciate you letting me go through a lot of those. A lot on the table. Thanks for getting through the tree piece. I thought that was, I'm pretty satisfied with that, you know.
Can I bring something up? On the community, on Facebook, there's a Woodburn community post. Several times there have been issues with the new housing, the apartments and stuff with bugs and
Roaches.
Yeah.
I see that too.
yeah, and also the shoddy construction. So, I mean, is there anything, I mean, we can't go and inspect, but I mean, are there requirements that they handle this, or what do they do? It's not just one time. I mean, it's fairly consistent.
I am familiar with what you're talking about because we hear that sometimes here, and it's sometimes it leads to other issues, right? Landlord renter disputes and these kinds of things, all the way down to they're not taking care of it too. You know, we
Yeah,
have
but I mean, this
cockroach
is new
problems.
construction
Yeah.
and, you know.
Yeah, we have a pretty good list of other sort of providers who can help people with legal issues. I can tell you now that they aren't the city, right? The city
Yeah.
doesn't get involved with, as our building folks like to say, they don't get involved with craftsmanship, right? They just, if it meets the building code, it meets the building code. If it's shoddy, you know, molding, right? And they put the
Right.
refrigerator in and it doesn't fit. Those aren't issues that kind of reach the building code level, I'm afraid.
Colin, Dan, anything from either of you?
No.
I have a next meeting. I also have an industrial project coming your way.
Thank you for that, Dan. I forgot.
Any news from commissioners? No, I want to thank everybody for all their hard work on the tree ordinance. That was a heavy lift, and there was a lot of passion behind that. So thank you all for sticking with that one. And at this point, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Mackenzie, do you have anything? Is that a lovely
No, I do
hotel
not.
that you're in?
It's my in-laws' house, actually.
Okay. Well, I hope you can enjoy your vacation in a couple minutes.
I was
Yeah.
going to file an ethics complaint if that was your hotel room.
It is
I'm
not.
glad to hear that.
All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
I take it we've had a motion. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.